Greetings, mighty companions, and welcome back to the Practical and Healing Applications of A Course in Miracles with me, Anna Rebecca Quinn, formerly Kujawa. So, welcome back to my Monday evening Course in Miracles class. I'm so happy to have you joining me here today to listen to the ideas of the Course and to possibly experience the miracles that come from these ideas. This is a Course in Miracles. There's a reason that it is titled A Course in Miracles, because this is a curriculum that enables you to change your mind and work miracles, miracles of healing, miracles of joy, miracles of abundance, miracles of release, miracles of freedom. Okay. This is a curriculum in how to experience miracles as natural as breathing is to the body. That's what this curriculum is about. And that is why I am still teaching and studying this curriculum after 40 years of studying and teaching it, because it works. It delivers on what it promises. Okay, if it didn't deliver on what it promises, if it did not produce what it says it will produce, if you believe these ideas, then I wouldn't be doing it. Okay, I still with the Course because it works. It truly is a Course in Miracles. It's not just called that for nothing. So we're going to start our class off, and I would like to, for our opening meditation, which I often do at the beginning of class, I would like to do the opening meditation with one of the pieces that I wrote in my most recent book, Declaration of Independence for the New Earth. This is my new book, and it's a Declaration of Independence for New Earth. You know, how we as humanity can declare our independence from the old fear control that we have been saying yes to for far too long. So as the opening meditation, I'm going to read one of the pieces from my book, and then we will get into what Spirit chose for us in A Course in Miracles. Okay, so if you haven't already, I want you to close your eyes. If you're not operating heavy machinery, driving a car, close your eyes and just breathe and just allow the ideas to flow over you. These ideas came from a loving state of mind, and they can help you to access a loving state of mind. So here we go. So this piece is titled, On This Side of Death and Beyond. Turn the music up a little bit, as this is our opening meditation. On this side of death, there is only wailing and mourning for a lie so cruel it would teach the children of eternal life that love and life can die. On the other side of the belief in death, souls sing and dance in their freedom from such a dark dream, and the sweetest of laughter can be heard in the soft breeze that does whisper round every living thing. O humanity, though you still suffer the fever dreams of death, there will come a moment in time when you will lay down the heavy robe death wears to conceal its nothingness from you, and you will gasp at the simplest truth that life ends not in death, but ever goes on. There and then, love will sweep you up in its laughing embrace and wipe away the cobwebs of sleep from your now glittering eyes. That was called On This Side of Death and Beyond, and it's from my latest book, Declaration of Independence for the New Earth. And this is available in Amazon, on Amazon. All right. So I chose that piece for our opening meditation because the section that came through after I did the random number generator prayer and then allowed the random number generator to choose which book we're in and then which section in that section, it chose for us, what is death? So, cheery topic, and it really is the ultimately releasing topic. What is death? It is in the teacher's manual, which is the third book of the course. There's the text, the workbook, and the teacher's manual. So if you would like to follow along, it's the last book in, well, and it depends on which book you have, but it's called the Teacher's Manual. And the Teacher's Manual consists of 29 questions that teachers and healers through this curriculum have as they're studying and teaching this curriculum. So we're in the Teacher's Manual, question number 27, what is death? Okay, so I'll give you a moment to find that. Welcome, Mary. Welcome, Brett. Lovely to see you both here in the chat here. And if you're watching this on YouTube, if you would like to support this ministry, this Miracles ministry, then go ahead, like, share, and subscribe. That lets the algorithm know that this content is important and it pushes this content out to more folks. And what could be more helpful to humanity in humanity's healing and awakening than these ideas, especially the ideas that A Course in Miracles has to tell us and teach us around the ideas of death. Okay, and this is extremely important because, like the first sentence in this section, and Greg, would you? I have listed, but would you put in the comments? Yeah, you know, it's 27, question number 27 in the teacher's manual. All right, and it is in the description of the class. Hi, Dan. Lovely to see you. Lovely to see you, my dear. All right, so this topic is centrally, crucially important to the release and the healing that A Course in Miracles does offer to us. Okay? Because as it says, death is the central dream. Death is the central dream from which all illusions stem. Okay, so first thing is telling us that death is a dream, which means it's not real. What do we know about a dream? It's not true. It's not real. You wake up from a dream and you go, thank God that was just a dream, right? So first it's telling us in the first sentence that death is a dream. And then it's telling us that death is the central dream, the central lie, the central fantasy from which all illusions stem. So it's extremely important. So the idea of death, the belief in death, first of all, the idea of death is just, it's an illusion. Death is an illusion. Death is not true. Death is a dream. Death is a dream that we are having. And death is a dream that we are having from which all of our problems, all of our pain, all of our suffering, all of our lack, all of our fear, all of our sickness. The Course in Miracles calls death, fears, lack, pain, suffering, all of our problems. The Course in Miracles calls all of our problems that we suffer from illusions. And it says that death is the central dream from which all of our problems, all of our suffering comes from. Okay? So in other words, if we didn't believe in death, then we could not suffer. Love the special effects. That's great. That's awesome. Thanks for doing that for me. That is the kind of special effects that you will see when you accept these ideas. So according to A Course in Miracles, if I didn't believe in death, if I didn't believe that idea, then I would not be experiencing, I could not experience any illusions. I would not be experiencing suffering, fear, pain, lack, all of those illusions, okay? But because I believe that I can die, you can die, they can die, then because I believe that illusion, that lie, now I suffer. Now I experience lack and pain. Now I'm afraid of my source, who is only love. That is the source of my life and the source of my abundance that never ends. If I believe in death, then I must believe that to say that death is real is to say that God, the author of reality, is the author of death. And if God is the author of death, then guess what? God will be feared. If you believe God is the author of death, then you will fear God. And fearing God, you will not communicate with God. You will deny God. You will not accept God's love, God's gifts to you. So you can see why in the first sentence it says, death is the central dream from which all suffering stems. Okay, that's the first sentence. Now, it says, isn't it madness to think of life as being born, aging, losing vitality, and dying in the end? Okay. Not only is that a depressing thought, but A Course in Miracles is asking us, doesn't that seem insane? Doesn't it seem insane that doesn't it seem insane to think of life as being born, aging, losing vitality, and dying in the end? A Course in Miracles is telling us that's insane. That's insanity to think of life as just you're born, then you age, then you lose vitality, then you die. A Course in Miracles says that's actually insane. That's not real. That doesn't make sense. That's not loving. It says, isn't it madness to think of life like that, as being born, aging, losing vitality, and dying? That's insane. That's madness to think of life as dying. It's madness to think of life as something that once life is born, it ages, it loses vitality, and then it dies. It's madness to think of life as dying. Okay? But that's what we believe. Okay? So what does that mean? I guess that means that we're insane. We are. Because insane means to believe in illusions as real. That's what insanity means, right? To think that illusions are real, that's a definition of madness. And if you believe that death is real, then you believe that illusions are real and you are insane. Okay? Beautiful, I love it. Thank you. And then it says, so now that's a question. Isn't it madness to think of life as being born, losing vitality, aging, and then dying? It says, well, we've asked this question before, right? It says, but now we need to consider this question still more carefully. What question? Isn't it madness to think of life as being born, aging, losing vitality, and dying? That question, we've asked it before, but we do need to consider it more carefully now, okay? And it says that death is the one fixed, unchangeable belief of the world that all things in the world are born only to die. I'll say that again. It is the one fixed, unchangeable belief of the world that all things in the world are born only to die. That's the one fixed, unchangeable belief of the world, that all things born in the world are born only to die. And it says, and that all things in the world are born only to die, that is regarded as, quote, the way of nature. And it's considered, death is considered It's not. It's regarded as the so-called way of nature, not to be raised to question, but to be accepted as the so-called natural law of life. Normal. Okay. In this world, the one fixed, unchangeable belief in this world that's considered the way of nature, the so-called natural law of life, not to be raised to question, is the belief in death. Death is what is considered the natural way of life, not to be questioned in this world. Wow. All right. So it says, then it says the cyclical, the changing and unsure, the undependable and the unsteady, waxing and waning in a certain way upon a certain path. All this is taken as the will of God in this world. In this world, the cyclical, waxing, waning, changing is considered the will of God. In this world, death is considered the will of God. And then he's saying, we need to question this. We need to question this and look at this and realize that actually this belief that death is natural and the will of God is madness. It's not the will of God. Even though the whole world believes in it, even though death seems to be the law of life, the natural way of life, the natural law of life, the way of nature, even though it seems like that in the world, it is not. We need to question that. The truth is that death is not natural. It's not the way of life. It's not the will of God. Wow, that's what we need to remember. And it says, and even though death is considered here in the world the will of God, no one even asks if a loving creator could will death. And no one's like, you know, if we're just born to die, and that's the will of God, then that doesn't seem like a very loving creator. Why would a loving creator will the death of all of its creations? Why would a loving creator, a benign creator, will that? That doesn't make sense. Why would a loving creator who loves their creations, who is supposedly eternal itself, create creations that are not eternal like itself? Why would a loving creator do that? Nobody's asking that question here. Okay? But we are asking that question here. That question is being asked here in this section in A Course in Miracles. Okay? Would a loving creator will that everything that it created is born only to die in a very short amount of time? We are asking that question. Our teacher is asking us to ask that question here in this section. Would a loving creator will that its creations would be born only to die? We are asking that question. We are being asked to ask ourselves that question, even though the world is not asking that question. All right. Beautiful. Hi, Nina. Lovely to see you. And hi, Liliana. Lovely to see you too. Hi, Mary. Lovely to see you all. And Greg, lovely to see you. Lovely to see you over there in the rocking chair. All right. So that was paragraph 1. So remember, in paragraph 1, it's reminding us that the belief in death is the central lie from which all suffering comes. If you did not believe the lie that all the world believes here in death, then suffering would be impossible. All suffering comes from the belief in death. And if you want to end suffering here, then when you question the belief in death, it's like the belief in death is like the hand that is holding the bouquet of balloons of all the different forms of suffering. It's like death is the hand that's holding that entire bouquet of balloons called suffering, pain, lack, disease, separation, war, you name it. All illusions. Death is the central lie from which all suffering stems. Isn't that deep? All right. Now, and it says, in this perception of the universe as God created it, in this perception of the universe, as God created, meaning perceiving the universe as dying, perceiving death. In this perception of the universe as God created it, it would not be possible to think of God as loving. So if you perceive the universe as dying, if you perceive death as real, then it would not be possible to think of God as loving. If you think that death is real, you could not help but go, God is mean. God is cruel. How could all these people die? How could death be real and God be loving? You can't believe that death is real. You can't believe that all things are born only to die and still think that God is loving. That's not possible. It's not possible to perceive God as loving if you think that death is real. If you think that death is real, you're going to think that God is the author of death. And if you think God is the author of death, it would be impossible for you to think of God as loving. That's how important, that's how crucial, that's how fundamental that belief in death is relative to your peace and relative to your experience of God's love. Okay? God is only love. God is only loving. And that's why God did not create death. And that's why death is not real. And that is why you do not die. And that is why all whom you love do not die. Because God is loving. But if death is real for anything, then God couldn't be loving. God couldn't be the author of death, creating death as real and still be loving. All right. Now it says because whoever has decreed that all things pass away, ending in dust and disappointment and despair, whoever decreed that is one who can but be feared. Whoever decreed that all things pass away, ending in dust and disappointment and despair, that's only somebody that you could fear. Whoever decreed that. So, if you believe that death is real, then all you can see of God, all you can believe of God is that God is holding your little life in his hand, but by a thread, ready to break off that thread of your life without regret or care. Perhaps today, you can't help but perceive that of God if you believe that death is real, if you believe that God has created creation only to die. Okay? And it says, if you believe that God is the author of death, if you believe that death is real, you believe that God is holding your little life in God's hand, but by a thread, ready to break that thread off without regret or care, perhaps today. Or, if God waits, yet is the ending of you certain. If you believe that death is real, you can't help but believe that God is holding your life but by a little thread, ready to break it off at any time, maybe today. And if God doesn't break off the thread he holds of your life, then if not today, well, it's going to happen certainly in time. Okay? That is the only way that you could perceive God, if you believe that death is real and that God is the author of death. And whoever loves such a God who is holding your life in his hand but by a thread, ready to break it off without regret or care, who loves a God like that, does not know of love. Whoever perceives God as the author of death, holding your little life but by a thread, ready to break off your life without regret or care, that person does not know of love. Because that's not what love does. Love wouldn't do that. That's not how love treats love's creations. Wow. Beautiful. I love it. Mary says, I need to hear this. That makes me feel safe. Me too, Mary. It makes me feel so safe. Because what is at the root of all of our fears? What is the core unconscious human existential fear? It's death. You know, if you believe that you are going to die, you can't help but be afraid. If you believe that those you love can die, you can't help but be afraid to love them. You know, you can't help but be afraid. You can't but help fear love. You can't but help fear God if you believe death is real. And to say you believe death is real is to say that God is the author of death and that that's what God wants for you. So, and if you are afraid of God, then you are literally afraid of your source of joy, your one true eternal source of joy and life. So that's why, Mary, I feel the same way, that every time I hear this and remember this, it makes me feel safe. I don't have to worry about losing my life. I don't have to worry about those I love losing their life. I don't have to be afraid of losing life. Okay. And so if death is the central illusion that is the source of all suffering, then that means then the correction of the belief in death, the not believing in death, is going to be the source of all your release and your joy and your abundance and your healing and your peace. Okay? So if death is the central illusion from which all suffering stems, then the correction of the belief in death is also going to be your ultimate release from all suffering. Okay. Monica says, I'm afraid of passing on bad codependent behavior to my kids. I understand that, Monica. And ultimately, Monica, as you allow your illusions, your false beliefs, what you learned in the past, like death is real, to be corrected, then you're going to be passing that on to your kids, whether you share that verbally or not. So this is the way to allow your own misperceptions, your own illusions, your own fears to be corrected. And when you allow the truth to replace your misperceptions, then you don't have to worry about passing it along. When you allow the correction of your own misperceptions, then the truth just naturally extends from you to all around you, you know, even without you saying a word. So, beautiful. All right. Okay, right. Who loves such a God like that? Who loves such a God who's the author of death? That person does not know of love. Because that person who loves a God who authored death is a person who has denied that life is real. Okay? If you love a God who is the author of death, then you don't know of love because you've denied that life is real. Interesting. To believe that God is the author of death is to deny that life is real. This is the ultimate answer, because we're talking about the core mistake that has made us fear life and fear God, which has made us fear love. You can't believe in death and know of love. Okay? They don't go together. You can't believe that death is real and not fear love. Isn't that interesting? It's so very true. It's so very true. If I believe that myself or others that I love can die, then I am going to be afraid to love. Absolutely. Now, then it says, whoever loves a God who they think is the author of death, now death has become life's symbol. If you believe that death is real and you believe that God is the author of death, then now death has become life's symbol. Wow. If you believe that life dies, now death becomes life's symbol. Wow. If you believe that life dies, then you're going to believe that love dies, and then now death has become love's symbol. And now I'm afraid to love because now I have associated love and death. I'm afraid to live because now I associate life with death, because I think that life can die. If you believe that life can die, you will be afraid to live. If you think that life can die, then you'll believe that love can die, and you will be afraid to love. And that is our problem. We're afraid to live because we think that life can die, and we're afraid to love because we believe that love can die. So, see how crucial it is. That's why it says we have asked this question before, but now we need to consider this question still more carefully. This question: is it possible that what God created eternal can die? Isn't it madness to think of life as being born, aging, losing vitality, and dying? This is a question we really need to consider much more carefully right now, because this question and this idea determines whether you experience suffering or happiness. That's how crucial and important this idea is. All right, beautiful. Monica says, wow, this is so me. Yeah, so deep. Mary says, so deep and philosophical. It really explains our fear to live, our fear of life, our fear to love. It really explains that, you know. we all have experienced the fear to love. We've all experienced the fear to live, the fear to live our lives. And now this explains why. All right. Now, if you believe that God is the author of death and that death is real, now death has become life's symbol. If you believe that life dies, then your world is now a battleground. A battleground where conflict reigns, which means opposites make endless war. If you believe that life dies and that God is the author of death, then now your what? Now your world becomes a battleground where conflict and opposites, where conflict reigns and opposites make endless war. Right. If you believe that death is real, now your world becomes a battleground between life and death, life and death. And isn't that the way life feels sometimes? We call it the struggle for survival. My life feels like a battleground where I'm always struggling to survive. It's always this contest between life and death, right? Have you ever felt that way in your life, where your life felt like a battleground, where it felt like you're constantly battling for survival, you know, the survival between life and death, death and survival, okay? This is how that happens, where your life feels like a battleground where you're struggling to survive, right? If I don't struggle against death, then I won't live. So it's a battle to survive. You know, that song, life is a battlefield, love is a battlefield. We've all experienced that. Like, life is a struggle to survive. Okay? This is how our world comes to feel like a battleground where we are struggling to survive. Okay? It comes from believing that death is real and God is the author of death. Okay? It says, and that's because where there is death, peace is impossible. Wherever death is possible, you can't have peace. You know, you can put by your suffering and distract yourself. You can put by your suffering in games you play to distract yourself from the inevitability of death, but that's the best you're going to do if you believe death is real. You know, if you believe death is real, you really can't experience peace. Really. Wow. I love that. Where there is death, is peace impossible. The best that you can hope for, where you believe that death is real, is that to distract yourself and put by your fear of death, put by your suffering in games you play to hide that fear from yourself. Okay? And Monica says, what if we believe in hell and purgatory? Then we don't live in love but in fear. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You know, to believe in death is to believe in hell and purgatory. Actually, they're the same things, right? If you believe in death, then you're believing that God has made death for God's children, for God's creations. You know, and what is death but a belief in hell and purgatory? So if you believe in hell and purgatory, same thing as if you believe in death, then you're not living in love, you're living in fear. If you believe in death. If you believe in death, then you believe that your Creator has created you to die. If you believe death is real, then you believe God is the author, and you believe that God is holding your life, but by a tiny thread, ready to break it off at any moment, maybe today. And if not today, then God's going to wait till later to break off that thread of life that God is holding, you know. And so you can't believe in death and experience peace. It's not possible. Okay. Mary says, wow, no peace with the belief in death. That's a big one to change the mind about. I need to ask HS to change my belief. Exactly. And that's what we're doing here. You know, this is A Course in Miracles, which means even though our belief in death is very ancient and very deep, and we have, we have believed in the concept of death for a long, so much so that we've learned that to question death is insanity. That's what we've learned, that death is so natural, so real, and it comes from God, which means if you even question death, you're crazy. That's how deeply we believe in death and that God is the author of death. Whatever you think is real is what you think that the author of reality has established, right? What is reality? It's what the author of reality has established to be real, right? So, beautiful. And Greg says, to believe in death is to believe in separation from love. Hell is the idea of separation. Exactly. Beautiful. Yes. So then it says, so where there is death is peace impossible. Okay. So wherever it is that in your world where peace seems impossible, where is it in your world right now that peace seems impossible? You know, does it seem impossible that we have world peace? You know, it seems to me, you know, that world peace is impossible. So that's one place where peace seems impossible to me. Okay. Well, wherever it is in your world right now that peace seems impossible, that is where you are still believing that death is real and that it was authored by God. Okay. And so that's where we want to remember, oh yeah, death is not real because God did not create it, which means nothing can die. Love doesn't die, life doesn't die, peace doesn't die, abundance doesn't die. Yeah, the body does, but that's not who you are. That's how you know that you're not a body, because the body dies, but you do not. Okay? All right. So now we're in paragraph 3. Beautiful comments and questions. Death is the symbol of the fear of God. And because of that, God's love is blotted out in the idea of death. And the idea of death holds the love, God's love for you, from your awareness like a shield held to obscure the sun. That's what death is. That's a great description of death. Death is a shield that hides the love of God from you, like a shield held to hide the sun. The belief in death hides the love of God. It hides the love of God from your awareness like a shield. That's what the belief in death does. It blots out God's love from your awareness, not from reality, not from shining on you. The belief in death cannot keep God's love from shining on you forever, but the idea of death can blot out the awareness of God's love from your awareness. So you can't believe in death and also experience God's love for you. Okay? You can't do both together. The belief in death hides the experience of God's love from your awareness. And it also hides the awareness of all love from your awareness. Like we were saying, you can't believe that love can die and not be afraid of love. If you believe that those you love can die, you're going to be afraid of love, and you will block the awareness of that love from your own awareness. You know, I tell this story a lot about how when my daughter Aria was born, I became terrified of death, of her death. And my fear of her death made me afraid to love her fully and completely, because I was so terrified of her death. And so I understand completely what it's saying about the belief in death makes you afraid of love, and it makes you blot out the awareness of love from your own mind, right? If you believe that love can die, you're going to be afraid to love. And if you're afraid to love, you are going to blot out and hide from yourself the awareness of that love. If you are afraid, if you believe that love can die, if you believe that life can die. So good to know. If you are experiencing a lack of love, it's not because there is a lack of love. God's love is pouring to you, pouring upon you eternally, forever, without exception. Okay? So if you are experiencing a lack of love, it cannot be because you are not being loved fully and completely forever. It can only be because you are blotting it out in your fear of that love, believing that that love can die. That is the only reason you could ever be experiencing a lack of love in your life. Okay? There is no lack of love. Life is God's love. That's what life is. It's God's love that is forever pouring to you, moving through you, upon you, covering you. That's what life is. Life is God's love, God's eternal love. And the only way you could not know it is if you're afraid of it. And the only reason you be afraid of love is because you believe it can die. Love does not die. Life does not die. God did not create life, you, only for it to die. God didn't create death. And so death is not real. The ending of life, the ending of love is not real. It's not true. And that's why you don't need to fear love. And that's why you don't need to fear God. All right. So it says, now the grimness of this symbol called death is enough to show you that the symbol of death cannot coexist with God. The grimness of the symbol of death is enough to show you that death cannot coexist with God, because it's grim. Death is grim. Death is a grim symbol, and God don't have anything to do with grimness. God is not grim. Whatever is grim, whatever is dark, whatever is sad, has nothing to do with God. And so the grimness of the symbol of death should be enough to let you know that it didn't come from God. It doesn't coexist. It cannot coexist with God. Death is a symbol that holds an image of you, a child of God, in which you are, quote, laid to rest in devastation's arms, where worms await to greet you. And even those worms only last a little while by your destruction. That's the symbol of death, okay? The symbol of death, the belief in death, is where you are laid in the ground, laid to rest in devastation's arms in the ground, where worms wait to greet you and last a little while by your destruction. That's the symbol of death. That's what death is. It's a symbol of the belief that what waits you is worms when you are, quote, laid to rest in devastation's arms. That is the symbol of death. Wow. Very grim, eh? What a grim symbol, that my destiny is where I am laid to rest in devastation's arms, put in the ground where worms wait to greet me and to live off of my death. Okay. That's the symbol of death. Wow. And it says, yet the worms as well are doomed to be destroyed as certainly. Okay. How grim is the symbol of death? You're going to be laid in the ground, laid to rest in devastation's arms, where worms wait to greet you and live off of your destruction. And even the worms themselves are doomed to be destroyed as certainly. And so do all things live because of death. Okay? That's the symbol of death. Have you ever noticed that in the world that we see, it seems like everything here seems to live off the death of something else? Well, that is the symbol of death. That's the story of death. Okay? If death is real, then death is what waits for all of us, and that all of us will be laid to rest in devastation's arms, where worms greet us, and then the worms themselves are also destroyed, as certainly. You know, when you believe in death, when you believe that death is real, then you experience a world where all things live because of death. Even if you're a vegetarian in this world, you know, you're living because of the death of the vegetables, right? This world is the symbol of death. And so in this world as symbol of death, it appears that everything here lives off the death of something else. Even the worms live off of the death of the body here. All right. Even to eat vegetables is to live off the death of something else. Okay. That is what comes of the belief in death. And it says, so when you believe in death, then devouring is nature's, quote, law of life, unquote. Now, in a world where all things live because of death and devouring is nature's law of life, in this world, God is insane and fear alone is real. So any kind of world where death is real and all things live because of death and devouring is nature's so-called law of life, that is a world where God is perceived to be insane. That is a world where fear alone seems real. Okay? A world where everything lives off the death of something else and devouring is nature's so-called law of life, that is the result of believing that death is real and that God is the author of death. And, oh, look, that is the seeming law of the world as we experience it, the world as we know it. Okay? That's why we seem to be experiencing a world where death rules, where death reigns, where everything dies and everything seems to live off the death of everything else. It's very grim. It's very grim. And that's why people are depressed. And that's why we're all afraid. Because who can experience peace in a world like that? Who can experience peace in a world where death rules, where everyone dies, and devouring is nature's so-called law of life? Who could have peace in a world like that? No matter how much power, fame, money, and physical pleasure you have, if you believe that death is real and God's the author of death and you're experiencing life as a devouring energy, you know, that you know, everything lives here because of devouring and death, you can't, you know, you can play games to put by your suffering and your fear of death if you believe in death, but that's all that it will be. You know, real lasting peace will be impossible. You see how important here is this idea, this concept, this correction of the belief in death. You see how crucial it is. It's absolutely 100% the core of your ability to have real and lasting peace here. It is the core of your ability to experience God's love, which means the love and the support and the abundance of the universe. You cannot experience God's love while you believe that life dies and that other things live off the death of the things that died, right? Peace would be impossible. And the best you could do is just put by your suffering in games you play to distract yourself from death, right? That's why in psychology tells us that humans' core existential fear is the fear of death. That is the core existential fear that humans suffer from. Well, yeah, that belief produces suffering. And so if the belief in death is the core of humans' existential suffering, then the correction of that belief, thank you Course in Miracles, would be also the answer to, there would be the ending of humanity's suffering. All right. Beautiful. Thank you, Mary. That's beautiful. Appreciate that. All right. Thank you, Mary. Thank you. And Julia says, so profound. Yeah, this is deep stuff. This goes all the way to the core, you know, all the way to the core of your belief system. And also it goes all the way to the core of what is determining how you experience life and how you experience the world. You know, if you believe that death is real and God's the author of it, you really can't have real peace here, no matter how much power, fame, money, and physical pleasure that you have. Okay. So it's really important. Beautiful. And thank you, Mary. All right. So now we're on paragraph 4. All right. Everybody take a breath. Okay. In paragraph 4, it says, the curious belief that there is part of dying things that may go on apart from what will die, that doesn't proclaim a loving God. And it certainly doesn't reestablish any grounds for trust. If death is real for anything, there is no life. If death is real for anything, there is no life. Death denies life. But if there is reality in life, then death is denied. So either all things live or all things die. Okay, there's no compromise in that. There's no compromise in the idea of life and death, right? There is no compromise like that. Either all things live or all things die. It doesn't make sense to go, well, there's a part of all living things that there's a part of all things, what does it say? That there's a part of dying things that may go on apart from what will die. It says if death is real for anything, then there is no life. Death denies life, but if there is reality in life, then death is denied, and no compromise in this is possible. In other words, there is either a God of death or there is a God of love. There's no compromise. There's either a God of death or there's a God of love. But they can't, there's no compromise here. You know, they can't be both. God of death and a God of love cannot coexist. Wow, there's either a God of death or there's a God of love. Wow, because a God of love and a God of death are completely incompatible, and no compromise can be made in that. All right? So, no compromise there. Now, the world attempts 1,000 compromises between a God of love and a God of death. 1,000 compromises. Well, God is love, but God allowed all those poor little children to die. Okay, he says the world is attempting 1,000 compromises between a God of love and a God of death, right? Where somehow God is loving, but somehow God also is the author of death, and somehow God allowed all these beings to die. Okay. The world is attempting 1,000 compromises with how God could be love but allow death, or be the author of death. Okay? Those are 1,000 compromises that the world is always making. You know, like, you know, where, oh, well, how is it that if God is love, then all these people and all these children could die like that? Okay, the world is attempting to do a compromise approach. Well, yes, God is love, but you know, somehow God is mysterious. That's one of the compromises that we make between a God of love and a God of death. We go, well, God is mysterious. You can't understand God. God's ways are above our own. We don't understand how it could be that God is love, but God created beings that die, and God would allow them to die like that. We don't understand. God's ways are higher than our own. That's one of the thousands of compromises that the world attempts to make between a God of love and a God of death. A God who is loving and a God who is the author of death. Okay? And it says, and not one single one of those compromises like that can be acceptable to love's teachers. So not one of those compromises can be acceptable to love's teachers. So, and that's because God did not make death. God didn't make death. So you can't make a compromise like, well, God is love, but he allowed all those children to die in that horrible accident. No, that's a compromise that no teacher of love is acceptable. You can't make that. Because why? Because God did not make death. Because God did not make fear. Both death and fear are equally meaningless to God. So, they're teachers of love. They can no compromise that the world wants you to make between God being loving and God being the author of death, or God allowing death. No compromise like that can be acceptable to a teacher of God, a teacher of love, because God did not create death. Because God did not create fear. Both death and fear are equally meaningless to God. Both death and fear are equally meaningless to God. God is not the author of fear. God is not the author of death. And God did not allow that death to occur. That didn't come from God, right? So when people are like, how could God allow all those people to die in that horrible way? Then your response as a teacher of love is, God didn't allow that. That wasn't God's idea at all. God is not the author of death. That wasn't God's idea. God didn't allow that to happen. That didn't have anything to do with God. That's a man-made thing that we projected onto God. So we as teachers of love, we don't accept any compromises between God as love or God as the author of death. Okay? So we don't be like, well, God is hard to understand and God is mysterious and maybe God wanted, what's another, one of the other compromises that the world makes between God being a God of death or a God of love is we say, well, God needed to call those people who died home. God needed to call them home. God wanted them back. Okay, that's a compromise that the world makes between a God of love and a God of death. That yes, God is loving, but God is the author of death. So we as teachers of God, no compromise between that is acceptable to us. God is not the author of death. It wasn't God's idea. God did not allow that death to happen. Death and fear are ideas that are equally meaningless to God. And as a teacher and a healer, you don't accept any compromises between those two opposites that cannot be reconciled. It cannot be that God is love and that God is also the author of death. Those are two things. Those are two ideas that cannot be reconciled. They are opposites. So teacher of love, accept no compromise in which death plays a part. All right, beautiful. Hi, Chris. Hi, Jerry. Lovely to see you guys. All right. Now we're in paragraph 5. The so-called reality of death is firmly rooted in the belief that we are a body. So the idea that death is real is firmly rooted in the belief that we are a body. And if God created bodies, then death would indeed be real. But if death was real and we were indeed bodies, then God would not be loving. Let me say that again. If death was real, and if God did create us as bodies, then God would not be loving. Hear that. If God created you to be a body and death is real, then God would not be loving. How could God be loving and be the author of death? These are questions that we just don't ask, that are just not asked in the world. You know, Course in Miracles is the first time I ever heard that question asked. How could God be the author of death? How could God have created the body, and so God is the author of death, and God be loving? You know, that is a question that the world does not ask, but this is a question that we must ask ourselves. Is it possible that God created us as bodies, and so God created death, and God be loving? How could that be? Okay. Our job as teachers and healers is to ask that question. The first question this section asks, isn't it madness to think of life as being born and then aging and losing vitality and then being laid to rest in devastation's arms where worms wait to greet you? How could that be life? How could that be loving? How, you know, if that is the fate of life, then isn't God the author of death? And if God is the author of death, is God really loving? How could you really love a creator who created you or your loved ones to die? You know, how could God be loving? And if God is the author of death, how could you not fear God? And if God is the author of death, then to be one with God means to die, right? If God is the author of death. So this is the question that we are being asked, that we must consider more deeply at this time. And these are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. Because as soon as you ask this question, then what is true, it becomes clear, right? Once you start asking these questions, then you realize, oh, now it makes sense that God is not the author of death or fear, because that would make God unloving. And, you know, so we're asking these logical, reasonable questions about death, about God, about love, so that we can allow our core misperception to be corrected, that death is real, so that we can stop fearing God, so that we can stop fearing love, which is the source of all of our happiness and all of our good. Okay. Now, it says, it says, the so-called reality of death is firmly rooted in the belief that we are a body. And if God created bodies, then death would indeed be real, but God would not be loving. And there is no point at which the contrast between the perception of the real world and that of the world of illusions becomes more sharply evident. Death is indeed the death of God, if God is love. If God is love and death is real, that means God has died. And if death seems to be real, which is really the death of love, well, now God's own creation, you, me, must stand in fear of God. If God is the author of death, then we need to stand in fear of God. If God is the author of death, then God is not loving, and we would need to stand in fear of God if death is real. If death is real, then God is not Father, but destroyer. If death is real. If death is real, God isn't creator, but avenger. If death is real. If death is real, then God's thoughts are terrible and God's image is fearful. If death is real. If death is real, then to look on God's creations is to die. Wow. If death is real. See, of course, in this section, our teacher is asking us to look at the belief in death logically. You know, we're being invited to look on the belief in death logically. Okay, if death is real, that means it came from God. And then if it came from God, that means God is not loving. God is a destroyer. God is an avenger. And then you need to be afraid of God. Okay, this is what logic tells you when you begin to question the belief that death is real. And to question the belief that death is real is to question whether God authored it. Beautiful. Okay. So then it says, there's a quote from, I'm not sure where this quote comes from, but it starts with a quote, paragraph 6. And the quote is, "And the last to be overcome will be death." Of course, the last to be overcome will be death. Because without the idea of death, there is no world. Woo! Without the idea of death, there is no world as we know it. Without the idea of death, without the belief in death, there is no world as we see it. Because remember, the world as we see it is a world where everything lives off the death of something else, and devouring is nature's so-called law of life. That is the world as we see it. And so without the idea or the belief in death, then there is no world where everything lives off the death of something else, where devouring seems to be nature's law of life. Wow. So once we allow the belief in death to be corrected by truth, then we will experience a world where nothing dies. You know, can you imagine? Like, think about that. Can you imagine experiencing a world? The Course in Miracles calls it the living world, the real world. Greg and I were talking about this in our class last night. It was a whole section on the real world. And the real world, the Course also calls the living world, which is a world where devouring is not the law of life, where it's a world where, you know, everything doesn't live off the death of something else. Okay, so once you allow the belief in death to be corrected for you by truth, then you will not experience a world that death seems to be the law of life. Right now, the world we experience, death is the law of nature. Okay? And how can you really experience peace when you live in a world where death seems to be the law, where everything seems to live off the death of something else? How are you going to really have peace in a world like that? Well, this is telling you how to experience the real world, the living world, where death is not the law, where everything lives off the death of something else is not natural. I would love to experience a world like that, where you're not always worried about death. You know, a world and a life where you're always worried about death is a world and a life where you're always worried about survival. You're worried about your survival, your loved one's survival. You're worried about the planet's survival. Why? Because you're experiencing a world where death seems to be the natural law. And how are you going to experience peace in such a world? Well, you're not. Now, you can you know, like you were saying earlier, play games to distract yourself from the fear and terror that you will live in if you believe that death is real. But that's all the best you can do, is play games to put aside your fear, your existential fear of death. So as you allow your belief in death to be corrected, you will experience the living world, where nothing dies, where everything is not living off the death of something else, and you're not worried about survival, and you're not worried about those you love surviving. Now that is the world I want to experience. I want to experience the real world. And the Course in Miracles tells us you don't die to get to the real world, which the Course in Miracles also calls heaven, which the Course in Miracles also calls reality, or the kingdom. You know, that the real world, the living world, where nothing dies, you know, that is a world that you don't have to die to get to. And you don't have to pay to get into. You don't have to earn entrance into the real world, the living world. The living world where death is not the natural law at all. The natural law in the real world is eternal life. Everything has eternal life, right? And so you don't have to die to experience the living world. All you have to do is allow your belief in death to be corrected by truth. And that's one of the gifts of A Course in Miracles, right? It is correcting your belief in death, which is correcting your belief in fear, which is enabling you to experience a world that is not a world of survival. It's not a dog-eat-dog world where you're always worried about survival. I don't want to live in a world where I'm always worried about dying and I'm always worried about survival. I don't want to live in a world like that. I want to experience the living world, the real world, where eternal life is the law. Okay? And the Course in Miracles is offering us a path to experience that now, right now, without dying, without physical death. And I mean, what kind of deal is that? You know, what could be offering us a greater value? What could have greater value than a curriculum that is offering us a way to experience the living world, the real world, where death ain't the law of the land? Okay, sign me up for that. And that is why I teach A Course in Miracles. That's why I study A Course in Miracles. That's why I'm so devoted to learning the Course in Miracles and sharing the Course in Miracles, because it is offering me that which, even though I don't understand it or believe it, I want. And I didn't even know was possible until I started studying A Course in Miracles. Wow. Mary says, Mary's, I have to write that down. Mary says, do you think that belief in death has anything to do with scarcity, the scarcity belief? 100%. Remember, the belief in death is where all illusions come from. Death is the central dream from which all problems stem from. And so 100%, the belief in death is also the belief in scarcity. You know, the belief in scarcity is the belief that I can lose something, or that something can end, right? That's what death is, the belief that you can lose something or that something can end. So 100%, the belief in death is also the scarcity belief. 100%. Great question, Mary. Great question. Okay. Now, so then it says, paragraph 6, and it's a quote, and the last to be overcome will be death. Of course, without the idea of death, there is no world as we know it. And all illusions, all suffering will end with this one illusion called death. All suffering, all scarcity, all lack, all suffering, all pain, all fear, all sickness, all disease, all hurt, all abandonment, all betrayal, all illusions, all problems will end with this one illusion called death. As a matter of fact, the end of the belief in death is happiness's, salvation's final goal. Okay? The final goal of all of healing is the end of the belief in death, which is the end of all illusions. And in the belief in death are all illusions, all problems, all suffering born. I mean, what could be born of death and still have life? But what is born of God and still can die? The inconsistencies, the compromises, and the rituals which the world fosters in its vain attempts to cling to death and yet to think love real, they're just mindless magic. They're ineffectual, completely meaningless. All of the rituals in which the world is trying vainly to cling to death, but still to believe that love is real, mindless, ineffectual, mindless magic, meaningless and vain attempts to cling to the belief in death, but yet to believe that love and peace are real. It don't work. You can't do it. Okay? It's anytime you're trying to cling to the belief in death, oh, the belief in death is real, and think that you're going to experience the experience of real love, lasting peace. It's just magic. You ain't gonna do it. You ain't gonna do it. You can't cling to the belief in death and still be happy. You can't do it. You know, it's a vain attempt. It's a vain attempt to be happy even while you're still believing that death and lack and loss is real. Okay. Lynette says, thank you, our living God. Amen. You know, the living world, y'all. You know, I mean, I know we can't imagine. It's like the living world, a world where death is not the law of the land. I can't even imagine that. You know, I can't even conceive of that. And then remember what the Course in Miracles tells us, that you don't have to understand how that could be. Just because you don't understand how there could be a whole world, a living world where nothing dies, doesn't mean it ain't real. Doesn't mean it's not there. Doesn't mean you can't experience it. Just because you don't remember or don't believe it's possible to experience a living world where nothing dies, don't mean that it's not possible. You know, you don't have to understand how you can experience the living world, the real world, reality. You don't have to understand how to experience that to experience it. This is how you experience it. You allow your belief in death to be corrected by truth. And you know, Course in Miracles does it for you. So this really is a Course in Miracles. It really does it for you. All right. Beautiful. Then it says, God is, and in God all created things must be eternal. That's the truth. That's the truth right here. God is, and in God all created things must be eternal. That's the truth. Okay? We're allowing our belief in death to be corrected by truth. This is the truth that corrects our belief in death. And he says, and do you not see that otherwise, if it's not true, it says, God is, and in God all created things must be eternal. Do you not see that otherwise God has an opposite, which means fear would be as real as love? If it wasn't true that God is, and in God all created things must be eternal. Teacher of God, teacher of love, your one assignment could be stated thus. Okay, teachers of love, listen up. This is your one assignment. Okay, if all this is true, then what's your assignment here in the world? If what this is saying is true, then what am I supposed to do in the world? Okay, given all this, there is no death. God's not the author of death. You know, what God created must be eternal. Okay, well then what am I supposed to do while I'm here in the world where death seems to be the law of the land, where devouring seems to be the natural law of life? Okay. Here, where it seems like everything lives off the death of everything else, what am I supposed to do here? What's my job, my assignment here as a teacher of love, a teacher of peace? Well, this is what it says. Teacher of love, teacher of peace. Your one assignment here could be stated thus: don't accept any compromise in which death plays a part. What does that mean? That means don't believe in death, don't believe in cruelty, and don't let attack conceal the truth from you. So, your one assignment here in the world where death seems to rule and peace seems to be impossible because of it, your one assignment, teacher of peace, teacher of love, here is that do not accept any compromise in which death seems to be real. Okay? Don't accept any belief, any compromise that says that, oh, death is real, but love and peace is possible here. Don't accept any compromise, any belief that says that God is the author of death and yet God is love. Don't accept any belief, any kind of compromise like that. You, teacher of love, teacher of peace. That's how you will transform this world where death seems to be the law of the land into the living world where nothing dies and peace is not only possible but completely natural for everybody. That's how you play your part in bringing about the real world, heaven on earth, is that you are the bringer of the reminder that God is not the author of death. Death is not real for anyone or anything, you know, and don't accept any belief that says, yeah, death is real, but, you know, but God is still love. Don't accept any compromise. Don't teach any kind of compromise. Don't accept that belief. Don't teach that belief that God is the author of death and yet God is also love. Okay? Don't accept that compromise. Don't teach that, teacher of love. That's your one assignment, teacher of love. That's your one assignment. That's your one job as teacher and healer for humanity. Don't accept any belief system that, don't accept any belief that combines love and death. Like, yeah, death is real, but yeah, God is still love, and, you know, that's your one assignment. Accept no compromise in which death plays a part. Okay? All right, beautiful. Thank you. Now, the truth is that what seems to die has just been misperceived and carried to lies. What seems to die has just been misperceived. Who seems to die has just been misperceived by you. You're like, oh, they died. No, you are misperceiving them. They did not die. Their body died, but they did not die. Who seems to die has been misperceived by you. So now, teacher and healer for humanity, now it becomes your task to let the illusion of death be carried to the truth. That's your job. That's your one assignment, teacher and healer for humanity. Let the illusion, the lie of death, be carried to the truth. And be steadfast only in this, teachers and healers for humanity. Don't be deceived by the so-called reality of any changing form. Remember, teachers and healers, truth what's true, what's real, neither moves, nor wavers, nor sinks down to death and dissolution. Be steadfast only in this, teachers and healers for humanity. Be steadfast only in this. What dies was never true. Don't be deceived by the so-called reality of any dying or changing form. Don't be deceived by the changing, dying forms. What's true, what's real, never wavers, moves, or sinks down to death and dissolution. That's what it means, teachers and healers, to be steadfast in your assignment. Your one assignment could be stated thus: be steadfast in your awareness that what's true, what's real, doesn't move, it doesn't waver, and it doesn't sink down to death and dissolution. What's real doesn't die. And don't be deceived by this so-called reality of dying forms. Don't be deceived by the illusion of, quote, dying bodies, because what's real doesn't die. It doesn't move, it doesn't waver, and it doesn't sink down to death and dissolution. Don't be deceived by that. Be steadfast only in this. This is your one assignment, teachers and healers for humanity. And what is the end of death? What is the end of death? Well, the end of death is nothing but this: the realization that you and everybody else is guiltless now and forever, and nothing but that. But don't let yourself forget that the end of death is nothing less than the realization that you and everybody else is guiltless now and forever. That's the end of death. The end of death is the truth. And what's the truth? That you and everyone created, everything created, you are guiltless now and forever. That's it. Nothing but that. And nothing less than that is the truth, which is the end of death, which is the entrance to the living world, the real world, where nothing and no one dies. And so there is no fear, and there is no sorrow and no suffering. And that is your inheritance. That is our inheritance as children of God, the real world. That's what God created for us. That's all that God wants for us. All right, you guys. Well, we finished that section. How wonderful. Thank you so much for being present for this healing circle where we join together to listen to the truth together and be healed by truth together. I so appreciate you joining this. And if you want to support this Miracles ministry, or if you want to support these ideas and strengthen these ideas going out into the world, which really needs these ideas, if the belief in death is the cause of all suffering, then the world desperately needs these ideas to end its suffering. So if you would like to strengthen these ideas by sharing them with the world, then you can like, share, and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or you can post it on your Facebook page, or in the details of this class, you can find my Venmo and Zelle if you would like to make a financial expression of appreciation for this ministry, support it, help to grow it. Also, you could purchase this book, Declaration of Independence for the New Earth. It's an extremely inspiring call to us, the teachers and healers of humanity, to take our place among the healers of the world. You know, that's what time it is, you know, to take our place among the healers of the world, right? that's our assignment, you know, to be the teachers and healers for humanity. Right? That's how we stay awake. That's how we experience the healing of our minds and the healing of our worlds, is to be a part of the healing of the world. Okay? So, and also remember, the Course in Miracles tells us that the healing of the body is allowing your body to be used as a communication device for love for humanity. So these are all ways that you can use your body for the healing of humanity, and thus heal your body and prosper your life. So I appreciate you all so, so, so very much. And I'm just glad you joined, and thank you for sharing this with the world. And I'll see you next time I see you.